we're ready to go.
Well, welcome everybody to today's ILP masterclass on critical conversations. So obviously as L&D professionals, we spend a lot of time communicating with a wide variety of people. Most of the time I assume it would go well, but occasionally it may go a little bit pear-shaped. So I'm really looking forward to the session this afternoon and hearing a little bit more about Trevor's model on how to deal with these sorts of conversations. So it'll be a great skill for us all to have in our toolkit, and it covers off a couple of our L&D capabilities that we've identified that help L&D professionals to be successful. So like building learner engagement, communicating, and obviously when we're facilitating. So I'm going to hand over to our host, our COO, Bill Gerard. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Carrie, and welcome everyone. I'm just going to put everybody on mute unless you're actually needed to be speaking at this stage. But welcome everyone, and I'm really looking forward to this session as well. I might begin just as I always do by acknowledging the original custodians of the lands we're all sitting on today and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So again, once again, welcome everyone. We've got a nice session coming up, I think. One of the things that was interesting for me and one of the reasons I asked Trevor to join us is the work that he does traditionally with I guess technical people is a little bit different. And so these are people who I understand are experts in their own area, but Trevor's working with them maybe on some of the more soft skills and how to get those conversations going. So I really wanted to look at this idea of how you engage with people. And I really just want to turn it over to him and Berenice to run the show. So I'm just going to say over to you guys.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Bill. And Kerry, welcome everybody. I thought that seeing as everybody, well, certainly everyone except in Melbourne is in lockdown at the moment, we'd start with a little bit of a essential skill, and that's how to make cocktails at home. So I'm going to teach you a model here of how to make the perfect cocktail. And one of the first things that we need to have is some really good ingredients. So I've actually chosen a non-alcoholic version this afternoon, seeing as it's not ring the bell time yet. But we've got some beautiful elderflower and the finest that money can buy, Angostura bitters, together with some, it looks like I bought this, but it's actually freshly squeezed lime that I got up early this morning for all of you to do. And then some lovely garnishes, some freshly picked rosemary from the garden that we'll use as our cocktail stirrer. So how do we make a cocktail? The first important part about it, other than the ingredients, is we really need to measure our quantities. It's very important to get the balance right between, the bitter and the sweet. And that's really what makes the ideal cocktail. So, we start off with 15 milliliters of the elderflower. Oops. And then we're going to add some lime juice. Just to get that lovely contrast. And then we'll add a mixer. All right. And then we'll carefully put a few of our, ideally you want about 4 drops of your bitter, just to give it that lovely little flavor and a bit of color on the top there. And then of course we want to make sure that we have some good garnish. So we'll put a little decoration on there and we'll use this as a stirrer. So we'll pop that in there, and there we have a beautiful cocktail. So there you go. Good ingredients, really good balance, measured quantities, and then the presentation. Perfect cocktail. Now there's one element that I left out that's actually really important. I'm going to illustrate it to you at the moment. If we don't get the order right, in which we actually do the cocktail, let's say that I put some bitters in the glass first. I'm now going to add my mixture to the bitters. Oh my goodness me. Oh no, what a disaster. Uh-oh. Not great. Unfortunately, there's absolutely nothing I can do about that. I will never be able to fix this with all the ingredients I have here to get that back again. Once the order's wrong, game over. All right, well, I'm just going to have to run off because apparently I need to be attending an ILP seminar. So I might see you over there. All right, sorry about being late. I'm afraid the traffic was absolutely awful out there. All right, so today we're going to be having a look at the topic of critical conversations. Now, you might ask me, why did I choose to call my book and the seminar that I run Critical Conversations? A better name, to be honest with you, would be Emotional Conversations, but I don't think anyone would ever attend any of my training courses, and certainly not buy the book with the audience that I have, because particularly with technical people, when you say that something's emotional, they assume that what you mean is it's too emotional. So if it's an emotional conversation, they would see that as a bad thing. And what I want to talk about today is the fact that actually most of these day-to-day conversations that seem pretty ordinary end up becoming pretty emotional conversations. And it's actually difficult to get it right. And that's that's what we're going to be having a closer look at. So a couple of years ago, I was invited to join a meeting in a company, and for once in my life, it was a really nice meeting. That I was the senior manager there, and I was included in this discussion, and it was actually a promotion. And an engineering director was promoting one of his managers, and I was sort of going to be there to observe, and I thought, wow, this is lovely. Finally, it's not a redundancy meeting. A disciplinary meeting. It's a really, really happy meeting. Within the first 5 minutes of that conversation, the engineering manager was threatening to resign. Now, how on earth can you get a conversation so badly that you call somebody in to promote them and they're threatened to resign during your conversation? So this is how the engineering director started this conversation. He said, you know how you're not very good at writing operational reports? Now, what he was planning to carry on say, the good news is I'm going to be promoting you and you won't have to do operational reports anymore. Yay, good news. He never got that far. What do you mean I'm not good at operational reports? Well, come on, it's just not one of your strengths. What? Wow. And I had to kind of calm them down and say, whoa, could we just, he actually literally stood up ready to leave. I said, do you mind sitting down? We're actually about to promote you. And that's the issue that happens if you get the order of the conversation wrong. Once you've sort of got the whoosh factor, even at the end of that conversation, when he realized that he was being promoted, to be honest, it was sort of, all right, well, thanks very much. It was just a horrible conversation. It was over. Once that emotional triggering had happened, it just didn't go very well. So I'm actually from an engineering background. I'm a qualified engineer myself, although I've been in management most of my career. And I'm also, despite the type of career that I've chosen in management and running training classes and what have you, I'm actually more introverted by nature. So I do find that, I love mixing with people. I love talking. I love doing this kind of thing, but it does sort of drain me from my energy. And what I find as an introvert, and also as quite an analytical introvert, is that I'm not very good in the moment in a conversation. I am probably the world's best communicator at 10 o'clock at night when I've run through the conversation 15 times in my head and redesigned exactly what I should have said and when I should say it and how I should say it. And it sounds like a fantastic conversation by the time, if I could write a book about it. But in the moment, I'm pretty hopeless. And the other thing I found is that I was getting a lot of feedback from people that would say to me when I was in my, I was a real analyst and, logical thinker and very strong opinions about things, and say, you always think you're right. And I found as a logical engineer, I found that an absolutely ridiculous accusation against me. Of course, I think I'm right. Who in their right mind would ever knowingly say something that they think is wrong? And so I'd argue stronger. Of course I'm right. And what I found later is that what they were really telling me is that, I think I'm the only person who's right. And I never sort of listened long enough to really find out if anyone had another approach, because I used to focus on the logical content of the conversation. And I'd analyze what was going on. I'd go to my head to know what I know. And then I'd have my argument ready about, that's what I just thought conversations were about. And what I learned over time is this actually got very little to do. You do need it, like the ingredients of the cocktail. You do need good content. But actually, it's not the content that is actually the main part of the problem. It's the emotional context that actually is the primary issue in the conversation. And most of the time, I don't actually know what the emotional context is, because it's all in the other person's world and not in my world. And so in order to try and get better at this, I read loads of books, I attended seminars, and there's some fantastic stuff out there, Crucial Conversations and all these brilliant materials of knowing, how to improve conversations. But the thing that I lacked is that I had all this theoretical knowledge, and I still sat in the meeting and kind of went, oh, what next? I never knew how to get going. Or if I got into trouble in the conversation, I never knew how to get out of the rabbit hole that I dug for myself. And so I started trying to sort of put a logical framework together to help me initially. And since then, I've sort of helped technical people with, technical people love models. They love frameworks, right? They love lots of degrees of freedom to do whatever they like. But actually, they like to know that there's a structure. You do A, you can do what you like within A, and then you do B, you do whatever you like within B. But you know that there's some kind of logical approach to it. And so that's the model that I sort of started developing. And it was really the result of the fact that what I found is that most conversations, and particularly conversations that go badly, they're a mixture of our emotions, they're a mixture of factual reality, opinions, what we want, what they want, but it all just gets muddled. It's all jumbled together. It comes out in any order, at any time. And people if you suddenly stop the conversation and say, so what are you, where are you? Are you giving an opinion, or is this a fact? That half the time they don't even know. It's just all, we hope that we stick it all in the ring. It all gets jumbled together, and somehow it's all going to come right. And actually the reality is it doesn't. And for most of us, conversations can actually end up going quite horribly wrong, even from the most simple thing like saying, hey, what's the time? And somebody suddenly thinks you're accusing me of not knowing how to be on time to a meeting or whatever. So what we're going to particularly focus on today, there's obviously a lot of stuff that I could be covering today, but I'm focusing on one particular aspect of this. And it's the concept that words matter. Yes, we need good intentions as well, but it's not about our intentions. It's often about the specific words that we've actually used. And then the order of those words actually matters. And thinking that we can just garble it all out, put it on the table, and somehow if we get some stuff wrong, it doesn't matter. Well, we saw from the cocktail exercise that it actually matters a lot. And we often can't unjumble it once we've sort of screwed it all up. So what some people might consider a bit of a bizarre concept is we actually need to plan a conversation. Before we go into the conversation, we need to think about what that conversation is all about. And the model that I sort of developed around this is really a simple little sort of 3-step planning model. And I'll give you a template at the end of the session for this. And the three planning steps that we have around that, first of all, is that we establish what the shared goal is, because we don't want to have 15 conversations. We want to figure out, okay, for this conversation, what is this conversation going to be about? And, is this actually the outcome that I want and the other person wants? Do I know what that is? It's not a tell session. And then we want to think about the context. So that's the story in full. What's the whole picture around this thing? What's the background? The reason this whole thing was so emotional about that engineering manager is this had been an issue with them for weeks and months before this operational report thing. So there was a lot of stuff around that was actually an issue. And so what we want to do is we want to really select and filter for this conversation and maybe deliberately exclude some aspects that we're not going to talk about, because it's not going to be achieving the goal that we want for this conversation. And then what we want to do is we want to quite strategically separate out the parts of the conversation so we know what are facts, what are feelings, and what is an opinion, our thoughts. They're actually different. And that's what we're going to sort of focus on today. So what happens if you get this wrong? I find, and I'm a bit like this, when it doesn't go quite well for an introvert, the introvert kind of just freezes up and they don't say much. Now, the extroverts often think, you know what, I'm actually pretty good at conversations. And I know, particularly working with managers, they come out of a meeting, oh, that went great. I go and speak to the people that they were talking to. They say, that was a terrible meeting, because they're often judging the conversation by the tell part of the conversation. So from their point of view, it was great. They extroverts, they love talking, they love sharing their views and telling everybody about it all. And the other person sitting there saying nothing, not reacting, they, well, that went well. I think they got exactly what I was talking about. So, I think this is actually relevant to both introverts as well as extroverts. So maybe it's just introverts that might use the model a little bit more as a prescription to help them with the silence piece. But I think, it's good conversation planning to at least know what these different steps are. So we're not going to do too much more on the planning aspect, but that's the idea of it, that you actually split out your planning of the conversation. And then you'll see that we actually make sure that the order in which we unravel that information is in those categories that I was talking about. So what we're going to be looking at today is this first part of the model, the first 3 steps, which is really around planning the start of the conversation. And the very, very first base step, it's almost like you can imagine that this is a bit of a rickety wooden staircase. And, you've got to stand on the first step and you put all your weight on that step. And until it's safe that you're not going to stick your foot through there, you don't move to the next step. And so the first part is really around what I'm calling fears. So it's making sure that there's actually some emotional safety for the other person, because until the other person has that emotional safety, any logical, rational conversation that you think you might be having, you're not having. You might think that the content's all there, but it ain't there, because this person is emotionally not feeling safe to hear that part of the organization. A couple of months ago, I was asked to investigate a customer call that had gone badly in a network operating center. And I was given the transcript of the tape recording of this customer that had phoned in with a customer complaint to the service desk. And it ended up, giving them on the net promoter score thing, they gave them like a 2 out of 10. So it was a terrible experience. And I was quite surprised, because this particular engineer is brilliant at what he does. He's a very, very technically competent person to solve this problem, which I know was within his capability to solve. And I thought, I wonder what went so badly. And so I listened to the story, and what it was a remote school here in Australia where the IT manager of the school had had the internet go down. And it was pouring with rain. The internet was down. He had a whole school full of children in his school. And so he called in and he said, hey, this is who I am. I'm from the school. He said, I'm standing in the rain at the moment. I'm from this particular town. He said, I've had to walk to the top of a hill because I had no reception on my phone. My whole school's down at the moment and I need your help. And in a very polite, logical engineering way, the engineer responded, could you give me your 10-digit account number? I don't have my 10-digit account number. Didn't you hear what I was saying? I'm in the rain. I'm standing on the top of the hill. I am, oh, okay. Well, could you maybe log into our portal and you can maybe give me what the IP address is of your service? Oh, at this stage, the guy was just freaking. Now, what was the fear factor that he was dealing with? The fear factor was, this person can't help me. And I have a school full of people and I've phoned for help and I'm not going to get help. And so even though this person could have helped him, the whole thing went pear-shaped after that. Now, had he turned it around and said, right, safety first, hey, that sounds terrible. You're standing in the rain, your school is down. I can understand that that sounds a really stressful situation. You've come through to the right place. I am going to help you. Trust me, I know what we need to do. I understand how to fix these sort of problems. Oh, thank goodness, right. Do you have your 10-digit? I don't have it. No triggering, because I've already been reassured that this is going to be a safe environment to be in. So, the secret around this thing is really that you don't start with the conversation in any shape or form until you know that there's any sort of emotional safety for the other person. So imagine a scenario where you've gone to go and collect your blood results from the doctor, and the doctor says, "So, have you got any history of pancreatic cancer in your family? Can I maybe give you some information about treatments?" I'm not the slightest bit interested in information about treatments, am I? Go back to that thing about, what does that mean? Now I've got cancer, right? So what's the first thing the doctor said? I want to reassure you, I've got your blood test. You don't have cancer, right? I've got a few concerns around some markers, and maybe there's some stuff we could do that'll, reduce your probability. Would you be interested in finding out more information about cancer treatments? Yeah, damn right I am, right? All to do with the order in which that information was given, because of the emotional reaction that we have, because we're human beings. If you've got a situation where there's been a health and safety issue at work, and the person goes in to see their manager and says, "Hey, I've got some great ideas about how this won't happen again." Is the manager interested in listening to that until he knows, hey, is John okay? First things first, is John okay? Yes, John's okay. He's not that badly hurt. He's in at the moment with the nurse, and it's all going to be fine. Now, are you interested in hearing some stuff about how we can, have this not happen again in the future? So the first thing, as I said, is we want to make sure that we've got a really solid ground first step, that we've validated that that the emotional safety is there. And then I step up to the next level, and that's where I want to make sure that my facts are your facts. Now, a proper fact doesn't have any emotional meaning. A fact is just a fact, right? We give it emotional meaning with all the context that we put to that fact. So the first element of the communication is really to try and make sure that we understand the difference between a fact and an opinion. So I'm going to get you to give me some feedback on something here. And I want you to just grab your mobile device that you have there, and you should all be familiar with QR codes by now. So you can log into Slido. So we'll load up Slido, and I want to get some feedback from you on a screen of what is Australia's most dangerous animal. And I'm judging it by the number of deaths in a year from this animal, right? Or 7 dogs. What else have we got? What's the most dangerous animal in Australia? Someone said an emu. All right, it looks like we got a dog. How many snakes and crocodiles and sharks do we have? Maybe this is the wrong question for an Australian audience here. I might close off the quiz at that point. The answer, as some of you got there correctly, is actually a horse. So the just as a bit of trivia there, from a worldwide point of view, the number one killer is a mosquito. There's over 1 million deaths per annum from mosquitoes. And you won't believe it, the number two is humans. There's 500,000 homicides a year from murders. But yeah, indeed, it is a horse. So, a lot of people will, be thinking snakes and sharks and jellyfish, but actually there's 100 deaths a year in Australia as an average from a horse. So the point of me raising this is that when we think of a horse, we think that is just a fact. I know what a horse is. It's a factual thing that, a horse is a horse. But actually, we put our own interpretation of our version of a horse. It's not actually the factual version of a horse. It's our experience of what we think a horse was to us. And this is where conversations can go really, really badly, because I think that I'm discussing a factual element of a horse. And in my mind, it's this beautiful, lovely creature that I'm, in my holidays, I went to go and, stroke in the little rides around the holiday farm. And the other person's thinking about the fact that their brother was killed by a horse. So the factual part of the horse are the letters, we know that it's HORSE. That's pretty factual, right? The letters that are there. And you could start working out from a factual point of view, it's plant eating, it's single-toed, it's a mammal, it's hoofed. That's just a factual part of it. But the actual meaning of it has a lot of emotional meaning, which has nothing to do with the factual element of it. Just again, as a little bit of trivia, which is also in the book that I gave you, or that I wrote there, the word run has 645 different meanings depending on the context in which you use that word. 3 little letters, R-U-N. And that's according to John Simpson from the Oxford Dictionary, the chief editor of the Oxford Dictionary. So argue with him if you disagree with him. So the point about this, and what we want to really get straight in the conversation, that one of the major pieces around having good conversations is to try and align the factual element of the situation first and separate it from where the emotional piece is going to come in, which is when you actually give your opinion on something, and not mush those together. Try and separate them out in time. Because when we're actually having a logical conversation about the factual part of it, hopefully there's not that, whoosh triggering piece on that. So, but we're not very good at doing this. I'm certainly not very good at doing this. So, we say your son's riding to, you're worried he's going to fall into the river. Hey, Josh, you're going to fall, right? How does Josh respond? No, I'm not. Because that's not actually a fact. That was my opinion. And when I give my opinion, then someone else feels free to give their opinion. So we want to try and avoid stating opinions as facts. Even if it's a we're convinced they're going to fall, it's still not a fact. It's our strongly held opinion, but it's not a fact. So the skill in this, and that's part of what that planning thing around is, when you're sort of figuring out what you're going to communicate with this, is to almost imagine that you've got a videotape of what happened and describe what happened. Don't describe what it means to you and your conclusions of what happened. Just describe what happened. Hey, you're riding, it's a bit of a ridiculous extreme here, but you're riding 20 centimeters from the edge of that path. That's just a fact. So we want to try and, just describe what the situation is or the behavior is that you're seeing without judging that behavior or concluding what you think that behavior means. And start with that. And when you've decided, okay, your facts are my facts, we're now aligned, we've both got the same set of facts. That same network operating center I was talking about, that was one of my big challenges I often had. If there'd been an outage in the network and I'd go downstairs because I was a senior manager and say, hey, how long was this service down for? I wouldn't get straight answers. I wouldn't get factual information. Oh, well, it wasn't my fault. John was sick. No, I'm not talking about blame at the moment. When did the service go down? Oh, blah, blah, blah. It's really hard. But the first thing, let's just get all the facts and then we'll figure out what that means later on. Right? So let's just go to the server. What was the exact time that it went down? No one's fault, doesn't matter, safety. What time did it go down? Get the facts right. We all agree that's the factual situation of what happened. Right, now we can move on. The slightly controversial piece around this is that the next step we jump onto is actually to say what we feel about it, because that's why you care. That's the human piece of it. And that's probably where the conversation is going to start to become emotional, because there's a reason we care about this. And the emotional meaning of it is where there's going to potentially start to become some sort of conflict. Now, most of us have grown up in environments where, particularly in technical environments, that's my sort of field, people will say, look, let's just keep emotion out of this. It's important that we just stick to the facts and we don't get emotional. Well, I'm sorry, but we're human beings. It's impossible. It's impossible. So I lived in Italy for a year, and I'll demonstrate to you what, looking emotional, being emotional looks like in Italy. Right? I actually went to go and fill up with petrol one day, and the petrol jockey told me to move forward, and I did. But in doing that, I blocked somebody else. And this guy got out of his car. He came screaming across there. I thought they were going to call the police. It was a massive issue. And I didn't fully understand because they were speaking Italian so fast that I couldn't work it out. But somebody said something to somebody else at some point in this huge, big thing. And they go, oh, okay, yeah, ciao, ciao, vieni qua, and it was all like big threads and off they went. Absolutely over. I was shaking for another hour after that, right? I thought that was a really emotional experience. Now, a similar situation, if you go into the average kind of workplace situation where you've got technical people and they're being really, really emotional in the meeting, you know what it looks like? Don't think that's not emotional, right? I had a situation with a chap recently, and he told his manager, he'd had a phone call with his manager, and he said, you know what, I just lost it with him. And we went to go and find out, oh my goodness, this sounds like a really bad situation. What did they say? What happened? And when we spoke to the manager, he said, no, nothing happened. He said, the guy just said, okay, and he put the phone down. So we went back to him and said, I thought you said you lost it with him. What did you say? What happened? Oh, you know what? I was so angry. I was so worked up, mate. I couldn't say anything. I just put the phone down. So the manager had no idea of the emotions that were there because there was nothing visible, nothing visual at all to get a cue about the internal emotion that was actually associated with that story. So, guy riding this bike, hey, Josh, I noticed that you got close to the edge. It's just a fact. I'm observing. Here's my video camera. I see that you're close to the edge. I feel concerned that you're going to fall. Now, by me describing how I feel rather than what I think, instead of him arguing with me, it actually invokes empathy, because there's all sorts of science behind this. This is not my field of expertise, but from what I've read, there's a lot of neuroscience behind this. That when as human beings, unless we're a sociopath, when we see somebody that needs help, we're just wired to want to help them. So now it's about Josh helping me with my concern around him falling. Hey, don't worry, Dad, I'm okay. He's actually reassuring me now. And that's the technique around it, that you're actually creating empathy with a human-to-human interaction with somebody, because they're understanding why you care about the situation. And now we're actually trying to help to address, my truthful view on that. Now, once again, the problem with this, the theory is super, super easy. The practice is not quite so easy. And we mix our feelings and our thoughts all the time. We're not very good at all about knowing the difference. So I want to do a little exercise again, just to kind of get everybody involved in this. And we're going to move into some breakout groups. And what I want you to do is to have a look at the 6 statements that are on this sheet over here, and just discuss whether you think that this is actually a statement where you're expressing a feeling or you're expressing a thought. And I'll give you 5 or 10 minutes to have that conversation, and then we'll come back and we'll all sort of feedback what you think, feeling or thought, using Slido again. Okay. So you don't have to do anything. You'll automatically move into a breakout.
Okay, then we're back.
All right, I think everyone's back. Just to get some feedback from what you thought about those, we'll use Slido again. And then we can have some verbal discussion as well, just to see what everybody thought with that. If you disagreed with your group, you're welcome to override what the thing is with your personal feedback. And hopefully you had some good conversations. It can actually get quite a deep topic if you think deeply about it. All right. So just be aware, if you're not using the QR code itself and you type in the number in, don't put the space. That a couple of people I think had a problem getting in. So it'll just be 333-136 with no space in the middle.
Trevor, I've answered the first question, but it's not moving to the second one. Do I have to wait for a prompt?
Yeah, I think I'll just get some feedback on, we'll do them one
by one, that's fine.
One by one, then we can sort of discuss it, yeah.
Great.
I haven't seen the results of that yet.
You need to stop sharing.
I think I just need to stop sharing so that I can see the result of the Slido. Ah, there we go. Okay, so absolutely, I think that's kind of the easy one. 100% of people, identified that indeed, I feel angry. I'm describing an emotion that I have. It's clearly a feeling. It's not probably the one that we'd struggle with. I feel that you're not listening to me. Is that a feeling or a thought? Yeah, spot on. So it doesn't help to use the word feel in the model to somehow trick the model into getting the right result, right? The idea of the model is that when you describe how you feel, you need to describe how you feel, and not to judge how you think the other person is perceiving this or what you think they're doing. So it's not. Obviously, there is a feeling that you're experiencing, but the communication around it is to express what that feeling is, and not to judge the behavior of the other person in this case, and what it means to you. Let's look at the next one. I feel you should speak up more. Absolutely. Again, it's a thought, isn't it? So people again sometimes feel that they are, because they say feel, and I get this a lot, particularly in the sort of technical field that I'm in, people sort of take it quite pedantically and they say, oh, I said feel. Well, that's not, it's not a feeling. I feel upset. Clearly a feeling. Now, I'm obviously taking this at a very superficial level in terms of the sort of neuroscience behind it. There was a book written by Dr. Lisa Barrett, How Emotions Are Made. And, you know, it's actually an incredibly complex mixture of your feelings and thoughts. And, you know, to what extent do your thoughts actually create how you feel and in reverse. So I'm not getting into all the complexity of it at the moment. We're just trying to sort of learn some lessons in terms of the language that we use, and actually being honest with ourselves when we're thinking something and saying, you know what, this is an opinion, and not try and sort of what confuses the conversation, particularly if you know people are not good at conversations, is when I say I'm feeling something, but I'm not actually describing what I'm feeling. I'm describing what I think. And so the other person is sort of left in this sort of awkward position that they're not quite sure what they're experiencing in that conversation. And that adds to the complexity of that emotional context, which is getting in the way of the actual conversation that you're trying to have with a common goal. All right. Let's just quickly just run through the last few. I feel that you're upsetting you, same thing, right, as the previous one. And what about the last one? I'm concerned. Is that a feeling or thought? Okay. So again, you know, some of you who felt that that was a thought, it may be that more complex version that I was talking about earlier on. But the essence of this is that what I'm saying is that, you know, if I know that I'm describing a feeling, I can actually name the emotion that's involved. And in this case, the emotion is concern. So I am actually describing a feeling, even though I'm not using the word feel. I'm saying I feel concerned. And I'm sharing with you that the emotion that I have, and the reason I care about this is because of the concern. Now, I'm sure that there's people on this call that are way more qualified than I am to sort of work out all of the you know, the sort of emotional, intelligent aspects of being able to accurately describe what's actually going on with us. But this is an absolute key part of, you know, on our learner wheels, if you like, of critical conversations, of really being clear about where we are in the conversation and correctly identifying for that part of the conversation whether we're actually, you know, describing a fact or whether this is actually something that I feel because I want to share with you to get the empathy from you. I want to share how this is affecting me emotionally. I'm not blaming you for it. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just saying that's what's happening to me so that you can be aware of the emotional context of where the conversation's going before we get into what I think. Because if I don't describe how I feel about it, when I get to what I think, you might attack me. And then, you know, I've already told you I'm feeling a bit brittly here, and then you attack me because I wasn't clear that I had some concerns around my emotional response to that. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, that pretty much covers the model. Just for interest, I'll just show you the full sort of picture of this. So the idea is that, you know, you start off with, you know, looking at the conversation in really two main areas. There's the start of the conversation, and this is the piece particularly for technical people who struggle to, what's the first sentence that I need? That engineering director that wanted to promote the person, you know, he's almost got to script that for himself so that he's in a bit of an alert state that I'm nervous because I'm having a verbal conversation that clearly wouldn't be a big problem for a much more extroverted person, but it's quite literally quite a stressful situation to start that conversation. And so by having some scripted starts that sort of follow the model in your own words, but really getting that clear, you clearly can't script the whole conversation, but you can certainly just script the start of it and you get confidence. It's the same as the advice you're given for public speaking, or if you're giving an executive presentation. You know, nail the opening, and then somehow, you know, you sort of de-trigger yourself, and then you're okay on to sort of go off piste and sort of free flow. And then the idea of it, if you look at the book that I wrote on this is a really critical part of it, is that the piece that sort of ties the start of the conversation, the main conversation, where we're now going to explore different points of view. It is going to be an intelligent human conversation around sharing of, views and thoughts and judgments and conclusions and what have you. You clearly got to do that, particularly in a business environment. But what makes it safe to do that is that I've actually made sure that I've done the 3F starter piece, and then I've actually aligned the goal of the conversation. I've got in the book, I call it find alignment. Make sure that we both want the same thing as an end result. It's also a crucial piece in terms of how do I get out of that? Once I'm down the rabbit hole, how do I get out? The first way I get out, if I'm in the main conversation, is I jump back into the shared goal. Whoa, I used to get involved in big business negotiations, and that's one of the tactics. Well, okay, can we just go back to what we both agreed with? Where did we have some common ground? What did we both want as an outcome? Get off this path of conflict and get back into that safe area of shared. Now, if that's not working, then you jump all the way back to the start and say, whoa, I think this person's not feeling emotionally safe. And it's almost like a game of snakes and ladders. Okay, let me just reassure you, this is, and you climb your way back up to, so now are we clear? Is that what we both want out of it? Now let's get back into battle and sort of get the shared ideas about, what's your perspective? Can I share my perspective? I really want to understand what you're saying. And that just gives you a kind of a much safer way of having a conversation without it becoming an argument. And that's really the whole goal of it. So the whole model is the 3S, really around how you plan that conversation so that you're going in with a strategy, if you like. You've agreed, don't mention the happy socks or whatever it is. I know that that's just going to create problems. It's not relevant to the outcome of this conversation. Starting off the conversation with using my 3F model, aligning, make sure we both want, where do we get agreement of what we both want? If everything goes brilliantly in this conversation, what do we both want as an outcome? And then we can share our thoughts, and obviously it ends up, we've got to make some judgments, and people don't necessarily agree with those judgments, but at least they feel heard and understood in that process. So, the sort of templated approach to that, if I was getting one of my technical people to sort of think about how they would go into that, is to really sort of prepare themselves with a scripted 3S, couple of starter phrases of how they kick off that conversation, and then just being aware, as soon as somebody's become defensive or they're starting to attack you, whoa, okay, this, don't fight back and get out your sword and start getting into a sword fight, or get all the, oh, well, I also feel bad, and get defensive. You jump back onto the previous step and say, okay, can we just stop this? Let's see what we both agree with. And then, you can actually sort of negotiate yourself well through that, that conversation piece. So I'll leave a copy of that if it's of interest to anybody with Kerry in the resources. And I think it's become a little bit of a tradition sometimes with authors who've written books to give away a few copies. So the first 3 people who just send me an email, tell me what you think of the model, good or bad. The first 3 people, I'll send you a free copy. I've got a couple of extra copies here. But hopefully you find that helpful. I'll give the model and the template to Kerry to add to the resources. And, if we've got a bit of extra time, I try to sort of finish the content a bit earlier so that we can have a discussion. I know there's a huge amount of expertise, and probably in some areas a lot more than I have on the subject in the room. And it'd be great just to get.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you very much for that, Trevor. That was very interesting. I think that went well, and I feel it went well. So there you go.
I love that.
So I've covered both ends of it process. But let's throw it open to everybody else in terms of questions or related aspects of what it is that Trevor's been talking about, and how we might actually use some of this stuff. So I'll throw it open. Let's just take yourself off mute, and I'll throw to you. So David, Iago, you do.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Bill. That was great, Trevor. One of the things that strikes me is that there are like lots of different models like this. I use one called ORID from the ICA. Rachel in our small group brought up the clarity wheel, and there's a three-part assertion method or messaging as well, amongst others. And so for me, what was really good about this was it's just a different perspective and different stuff. And it just gives deeper insight into things that I do already. And for that, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for the feedback, David. Yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot.
Might ask a question?
Yes, please, fire away, and then I'll check the chat as well.
Yeah, Trevor, I noticed in the in your template, you had a little box saying "Do not discuss" or basically avoid this area. I just wonder whether, just wonder how you get people thinking about the risks associated with deciding before a conversation what you don't want to talk about.
Yeah, look, I think that, you know, part of the planning aspect is to really think through the full picture. You know, what's the full story? What's the context behind this? What's my relationship with this person? This is, you know, everything we do in NLP, they call it your mind map. You know, it's all sort of wired in there. We have all these biases and views and attitudes and all the rest of it that we sort of built up. And what we're trying to do, remember, this is more in the context of a business. I work in a business environment, and I know we can use it on our private lives, and people tell me that they do. But often what we're trying to do is we're trying to, in a very efficient way, get to the heart of a particular issue that we're discussing. And what you want to try and get people to do is to actually, at the start of the conversation, say, right, what is this conversation about? And what do we both want as an outcome? That's our shared goal, right? Now, when somebody then says, yeah, well, what about that thing you did last Friday? Okay, can we just leave that? Let's have another conversation about that. But this conversation is about this other thing. When it gets muddled together, because of the emotional mushing of, you know, emotions and all this other stuff we're talking about, I don't know now whether what I'm hearing is actually a logical, you know, reasonable, reasoned argument for or against an issue that we're trying to discuss, or if embedded in that is actually he's trying to punish me for something that I did last week in the way that, well, I disagree with you. He doesn't really disagree with me, but he's trying to say, look, you think you're a smart ass and I don't, so I'm going to tell you that I disagree with you. And so why I say that, you know, in the planning thing, decide what you're going to avoid. Often we'll know those little things that wind people up, right? In this particular case, you know, this operational report thing, this particular manager, you know, had a big hang up. I knew that because I did business coaching with him. He was a senior manager, but he never had a degree. And other people didn't mind, but he had a hang up about it. And so when his, you know, double master's genius engineering director boss said to him, look, you're not good at writing reports. What it meant to him is this whole life story about never having done a degree. Nothing to do with the report, which actually was fine, you know. Someone says, oh, there's a spelling mistake on page 7, and you remember failing the spelling bee when you were 12. It's just human stuff that you want to try and almost protect. And that's the idea of the avoid. If you know you're going to walk into one of those things, just have the discipline to say, not in this conversation. I'm not saying never have that conversation. And sometimes you might get into a conversation and say, you know what, I think there's a bigger conversation that's more important. Can we re-engage? And I always say to people, never be a victim of the timing on a conversation. Say, look, I need some time to think about this. Can we come back at 2 o'clock and let's have that conversation? But then go and plan that conversation. Once you get used to using this model, I mean, I'm not saying you have to spend, you know, when I used to be involved in big business negotiations, we might spend the entire day working on a negotiation strategy. Sometimes in business conversations, I've only got 5 minutes of preparation, but I just grab my little template and say, right, that's the goal. I think this is what they wanted, and I'm ready to go. The planning could be anything from 5 minutes to 5 hours. So I hope that answered your question, Mark.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
It struck me by what you were just saying there, Trevor, about focusing on the negative side of things, which tends to happen through education and early upbringing in some cases. I remember Tony used to always talk about, you know, you got a 2,000 word essay that you put into school, and what does the teacher focus on the 20 words that you spelt wrong? And it's that kind of process rather than the positive side of things.
It's actually
Anybody
a great analogy, because I grew up in a sort of educational system that was quite sort of strict academically. And even if you did a maths class, they would criticize your spelling. And I was quite surprised when I moved to the UK, my one daughter struggles with spelling. She's super bright. I don't know if she's got some kind of, thing, ism of some sort with it, but she just struggles with spelling. And I was often surprised that the teacher in certain classes wouldn't mention the spelling. And I went and spoke to the headmaster about this and said, isn't spelling important? They said, yes, it is, but not in this subject. We're trying to assess a different skill here, and I'm not going to knock her on her spelling, because it's going to inhibit her views on this other subject. And it's almost the same as this critical conversation piece of saying, hey, let's pick our battles on this thing. Let's not in every single subject this poor child does knock her spelling. Let's deal with that in English where it's about spelling.
Very good point. Anyone else got something? Eileen.
Hi, Trevor, thank you very much for sharing your insight and your generosity. I certainly am reminded to use the 3 Fs now. I think it's actually translated in so many different ways, different models. I think one of which is actually David Rock's SCALV model, except there's quite a bit of resonance in there. And I also have to say that as a trained negotiator, the concept of actually having a middle ground, common ground, or even shared goal is a really good way of shifting, just making shift back so that we don't focus on the negative, because things just get into a spiral, and usually a downward spiral. We do that. So I think it's a skill in itself, and reminded me. So thank you. It's a really good session.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Eileen. Thanks for that feedback. I know academically knowing about this, I've got to have a lot of discipline sometimes to say, Trevor, don't score points here. The goal is not for you to look smart. Just shut up. Because it's, we actually do like sometimes just proving that we're right. No, but I just want to say that I was right about that. Right?
Mary, you've taken yourself off mute. Did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah. What I was going to say is I like the model because it's the language is very simple, and like the sort of thing you could even teach to teenagers. And yet, there's sort of sophisticated thinking behind it. And I think that's always a good thing if you can translate it into simple language without too much jargon.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I appreciate that feedback, because that was pretty much the, one of the goals that I had around this. And I was criticized quite a lot initially about trying to almost script some openers, because then it's never going to be right. If you put the whole thing together, you're going to say, well, that's a pretty lousy conversation. However, in a business environment, if you can have a lousy conversation and get a really good outcome, it's a lot better than a great conversation with a terrible
lousy outcome. Yeah.
So, I always say to people, can you just use the model until you're good at it? And then when you're good at it, break the rules, do whatever, because people think that they're using an advanced version by saying, like, for example, those are real life examples that shows you that the low EQ of a lot of these genius people that I work with. They will absolutely say, no, it was a feeling. I even put feel in the sentence. Well, that doesn't mean it's a feeling, right?
That's right.
And I think for people with a high EQ, you'd say, what? People can get that wrong. That's crazy. But, it was literally designed that I think a lot of us think we're better at it than we are. And I particularly see that, I'm kind of worked at an executive level where the executives think they're great at it and the HR people think they're great at it. And the truth is they're not as good as they think. And it's, having a simple model the way you can sort of judge yourself, and then hopefully, maybe through a bit of a blunt instrument, but stop yourself falling into these pitfalls.
And I think having the script, I think it's very helpful for some people if they don't know what words to put together. Just the fact that they've got a little formula for working it out before they start can be really helpful just to get going.
Exactly. Yeah. Let me reassure you, I noticed, I feel, and make sure I think is later. It's really simple. Yeah. Thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Just supporting.
You don't make any money out of writing books, so this kind of feedback that is helpful is very, very encouraging for me. a lot of work into it.
The only thing I would question about that, Mary, is when you say it's simple enough to teach to a teenager. I thought teenagers already know everything.
That's right. They do.
They know everything.
Yeah.
Adam, did you want to say something?
I was just going to support what Mary said and say, yes, that script gives them the initial confidence when they don't have any. And then, as Trevor said, when they got the confidence, they don't need the script or the model anymore.
That's right.
Yeah.
Could I just thank you, Trevor. Really interesting stuff. And I'm just wondering, this can also be used as openings for training workshops, I assume, as well, to put people at their ease and to get them on side and feeling positive about it. Because I teach finance, and a lot of people are just fazed by finance. And I'm just wondering now about changing my opening based on what you've just said.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a lesson that I learned. I sort of specialize in building high performance teamwork and teams. And I think, that Google found this through research, actually, that the number one thing that you need before you start building any teams through all these stages and what have you is emotional safety. People need to feel that they can give their opinion and they're not going to be ridiculed, or they're not going to be, that it's actually going to be not, there's some sort of tribal thing we have that we're going to get thrown out of the tribe if we make a fool of ourselves. And so people withhold the information, or they play a different game to try and look impressive. And it's not really what they mean. And the idea of this is to get clarity. It's about being able to tell the brutal truth, to be absolutely crystal clear. And yet you think that, there's no problem with our relationship because you know that I want what you want. And, and also I've also excluded stuff that I know will be hurtful and didn't matter. So why would I mention it? Right. And then I can tell you with clarity what's going on. And a lot of organizations find that they're so trying to be politically correct or kind. I see this a lot. I've been unfortunately involved a lot in business with over the years, and in American companies and what have you, with redundancies. And it's much more hurtful to people in the way that managers tell them the news on things, because they're trying to be kind to them, but they're not clear. And it's much, much kinder to them to get the clarity, but also to know, what, I care about you as a human being, and I also want you what you want as an outcome. So I totally agree with you on that. I think one of the things I have to do when I run training with engineers and technical people, particularly if I say I'm trying to make it interesting and do something fun. Well, engineers don't enjoy fun, right? If they think it's the type of fun that extroverts like. So I've got to tell people, you know what, I'm going to ask you to get involved in a role play, but don't worry about it. Nobody acts, nobody makes a fool of themselves. You've got the script in front of you. And even then, I was in a class in America once, and I had some people up, there's a different class I run, and I got them reading this play, and I had the big boss was one of the characters in the play. And I said to this person, hey, and I had this huge, big sort of comic tie, and I popped this, tie over his head. Oh, nobody told me I was going to have to wear a stupid tie. And I thought, oh, okay. So now, set the bar quite low now. Read a piece of paper. You're a really, technical manager in an organization. All I've asked to do is read a piece of paper in front of a class. And yet you didn't feel emotionally safe to do that. And I had to take that on board and say, well, next time, you don't ask in those sort of environments, right, let me have 4 volunteers. I have to go pre-organize behind the scenes. Hey, would you mind volunteering just to read a bit of the script and the thing? And once the first few people go, then everybody's got their hands up because they feel emotionally safe that, hey, they did it. They're still alive. No one laughed at them. Hey, I'll get involved. Yeah, I don't mind doing that. I'll do the next one. But until you make them feel safe, I get a lot of this.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Anne had put something in the chat that said she really likes the your facts are my facts idea. And we often assume that our facts are matching when they don't. And I guess it's, how do we know that, and how do we actually check that? It's really an interesting discussion.
Yeah, and that's one of the ideas, I don't actually have the staircase in the book, but I through running seminars, I actually developed the staircase. And the reason I put the model into a staircase is I've actually found that it's, in the learner wheel thing, you say, you know what, let me reassure you, I notice, I feel. In the real world, in any, reasonably complex conversation, you're not going to get that type of communication happening. But another way of thinking about it is that, hey, I think we're emotionally safe to have this conversation here. Now I want to align facts, and I'm going to spend, like I would, as I said, go down to the network operating center where people think they're going to lose their jobs because the service has been down for 6 hours. And, you know, the first thing is to reassure, listen, no one's going to get fired, right? I understand this sort of stuff happens. We're on top of it. The reason I'm here from senior management is I want to help, right? Oh, okay. Thank goodness, right? Now let's get the facts straight. And you don't move off the facts step. Don't move off it until my facts are your facts. And we absolutely, can we get this written down? It might take an hour instead of all this is about is just, let's put it up on the board. I don't care who did it, when, how, what are the facts? And it's not about, it is a lot more difficult in practice, as you say, Bill, than in theory to actually say, oh, your facts, my facts. And that's why I put that thing up about a horse. Because even something that you think is so basic, it's not easy to see what is actually a fact.
Surely if something is my fact, then it's just an opinion.
Well, what you're trying to do is to see, is it my fact, or is it actually, if my fact is your fact, then it's a fact.
Then it's a fact, yeah. So
right? If my fact isn't your fact, it might be an opinion. That's a strongly held opinion, but then it's an opinion because actually we said, look, it's just a fact that, you know, you didn't do it. Well, I don't agree with you. Well, then it's not a fact yet. Okay. I just wanted to thank Rach as well. She put a reference in the chat that I didn't respond to earlier. You know, thanks for that extra research around it. I think that's interesting. If anyone else is interested in some of the more sort of academic side of it, Professor Gervais Bush wrote a book about 10 years ago called Clear Leadership. And he really sort of also addresses, he doesn't do the model I'm talking about, but he really does sort of address the, you know, in a lot more academic detail, the differences, you know, between thoughts. And his context is again around clarity in organizations.
All right, thanks for that. Well, we're just about near the end. Is there any last minute questions or comments? I think it's been a great session. I really enjoyed it. So thank you again. Big thumbs up. I might as well get a picture now. So if everybody wants to smile and put their thumbs up or whatever they're going to do, I'll take a screenshot. There you go. Cheers. Excellent. Got that. And let's start to finish up. Our next masterclass features a well-known individual here on the screen. I've been talked into doing a masterclass after having facilitated 33 of them now. I've been asked to, the reality is I couldn't find somebody to do it for me, so I've just volunteered myself. But I'm going to be looking at critical thinking, which is an area that I've been focused on for a long time, critical and creative thinking. And I'm going to pitch it because critical thinking can be done to almost any sort of focus, subject area, etc. So this one I'm going to be using, I'm going to focus on critical thinking, and asking the right questions is the key, but I'm going to focus it on how we design for learning transfer in that sense, and so how we might use some of those techniques. When I did it for CPA Australia the other day, I used the example of how to grow the business, the firm, and things like that. So I can use it for any number of things. So what I want to be able to do is give you an introduction to some of the stuff that we're going to be looking at, some of the basics, and then actually get people to work through some things, processes using some of the tools that I'm going to share with you. So I hope you'll be able to come along and join me. The more the merrier as far as that, this goes. But that's pretty much all there is for me. So Carrie, why don't I turn it back over to you and we can finish up as we go.
Right. Thanks, Bill. Thanks everybody for attending this afternoon. And obviously, thank you so much, Trevor. You had me at the cocktail, so way to grab people's attention right from the start. And I agree with Rachel, it's a great analogy for what you covered today with getting the context and the concept sort of aligned, which is good, and a great model to add to our toolkits, as we mentioned before. So you can use it in a variety of different ways, particularly as Malcolm said, you know, at the start, I was sort of thinking you could even use it at the end when people are worried about applying it back in their workplace, some of the fears that might hinder them. So yeah, a whole range of uses. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your model with us this afternoon.
And also thanks to Bernie as well for
Yes, in the back,
and everything for us.
setting it all up. So.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. I've no idea how she organized all that, but it worked. So thanks very much, Mary.
And I'm looking, I don't know whether that was a virtual screen or was a real one, but if that's your bar, I'm coming to visit you after COVID. So, but thank you, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for a great masterclass. And hopefully we'll see you in a fortnight, or we'll see you on Friday in the L&D lounge. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks very
everybody.
much. Thanks,
See you.
Trevor, Kerry, and Bill.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Julie.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.